Okay, we're going to take a look at percents, and to do so, let's take a look at this first task here that says solve the following problem, explain your solution, method with the peer. Well, we don't have that here, but we'll talk about it together here. So in the rectangle on the right, shade in 6 squares. So what we want to do is shade in 6 squares here, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to shade in, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 shaded squares there. And then looking at that, use the diagram to justify what percent of the rectangle shaded. So let's look at the total here. So I've shaded 6 here, and then looking at those 6 that were shaded, the total here is 4 by 1, 2, 3, 6, 10. So there's a total of 40 different, we have 40 different squares there. So there's a total of 40. There's a 40 of total, and then we shaded 6. So the question and a quick introduction here is, what percent is that? Since percent is usually what we call out of 100, as you read here from Common Core, 30% means 30 out of 100 times. And so we don't have 100 here, so it's hard to say. It's 6%, 60%. And so when we look at, we have to then think about what is this relationship. And so one way to think about it is that we have 6 out of 40. And so that's one way to do that and think about, okay, what can we do with that? One way to do that and think about percent, since we know percent means a rate per 100 or something out of 100, meaning, for example, the example we're talking about is if I say 25%, 25% is the same as 25 out of 100, which we know that's 0.25, 25 hundredths. So that's the idea of a percent. So it's here, we don't have to have those values. So one way to do that is somehow turn it into an equivalent fraction. So 60 out of 40. What would we multiply this by to give us a denominator of a power of 10, right? And so one way to do that would be 40 times what? 40 times, I think, 25. So we do 40 times 25, that would be 100, 1,000, and then I do 6 times 25. So we're using equivalent fractions here. This is 150. And so looking at those values there, we can then say, I know how much percent this is. This is the decimal is 0.150. And then that would lead us to saying that is 15%. Because if we can simplify that, we can say this. Looking at this here, oops, I have a mistake. Actually, I did my multiplication incorrect. Looking at, it's not 150. 6 times 25. 6 times 25 in this case, again, is 100. No, it is 100. Oh my goodness. So we have, and I did this right, 6 times 25 is 150. And so what we end up with here is that this is 0.150. And then this is 150 thousandths, but we can also see this reduces to, if you look at that, to 15 over 100. Either way, we say this is 15%, which is hard to see just here, but I know looking at it, I have some idea that I know it's less than half. It's probably less than a quarter because there's 1/4, so you can at least estimate it. So that's one way to kind of think about it. Another way, which we learned later on, which we learned is ratios and proportions, which we learned in the previous section. You say 60 out of 40 is what number out of 100? And so then that's another way we could go about in solving that and say, okay, cross multiply. This is 40x, x equals 15, and then you get your 15%. And the other way would just be with the calculator, right? Just use a calculator here and then do 6 out of 40 and you get 0.15, which is, again, 100%, because a percent means something out of 100. A shortcut, what people do sometimes with that is they just multiply that by 100, and that gives you your 15%. That's our introduction to percents.